All right, here we go with chapter 10. This is other first moves for white, covering everything essentially that we haven't looked at so far, and that's common enough to go into this miscellaneous chapter. How are you doing, Jesse?
I'm doing great. So, in other chapters, we've covered d4, we've covered c4, we've covered knight f3, and if you want to learn about e4, we have our Caro-Kann course. And in this chapter, we're covering everything else. So
Yes.
we're not going to go super in depth because these are very offbeat and you're not going to see them hardly ever. So let's start with f4. This is called the bird opening. Any idea why it's called the bird?
No, do you know the answer?
I think it's a guy's last name, actually.
Ah, I was hoping for something else. Like
Yeah.
flying V attack or something, but
Yeah.
yeah.
D2
So,
for life.
yeah, so we're going to recommend D5. This is a dynamic Slav course. We've been recommending D5 and C6 and all the other lines. So we're going D5 again. The most common move is knight to F3. Now here we're going to break away a little bit from our usual setup, and that's because white is allowing us to grab extra center space. I think it's so strong that I can't recommend C6. Like, I don't see a good reason for C6 here, so let's go C5, grab that center space right away, and after E3, we have this really nice setup. Pawn to G6. This is too strong not to recommend. So I know we don't do a lot of kingside fianchettos in this course, but this is just a really good position for black. It's like a reverse Dutch, and it's a good line for us.
Yeah, so this bishop is going to have a ton of influence for the whole game. So hard to dislodge it from the G7 square. So if you are familiar with the Dutch, we want to fianchetto our light square bishop over on this side. That's like from the white side playing against the Dutch. Just a really strong piece. So yeah, like Matt said, too good to not recommend.
And if you think about what we're recommending in this course from the black side, we have some Stonewall Dutch. We try to avoid pawn to G3 lines for white. We try to avoid that kingside fianchetto against us. So it makes sense that we would use it. It's still
Yeah,
consistent.
yeah. It's too strong. We don't want to play against it either.
Yeah.
So after bishop b5 check, we do have a couple options, but the simplest is bishop d7. This bishop is going to be a monster for us. If we trade off the light square bishops, it's going to benefit us in the long term. So they'll take. We want to take with the queen. I think the c6 square is a little more ambitious with the knight, and taking here, knight doesn't have much of a future, especially with the e5 square taken up. So we'll take with the queen. White will castle. Here's our knight c6 move, and looks like white is going to try to challenge us on the long diagonal.
Yeah, this is sort of like a nimzo-larsen setup as if white started b3. Oftentimes they'll do this exact same structure and trade off the light square bishop. So it's very close to those types of positions. We go bishop g7, poking at the rook in the corner. There's no bishop to b2, so they had to play knight to c3. And this actually kind of admits an earlier inaccuracy by putting the b pawn there at that timing, with that timing because of this bishop g7 move. So now we can play knight to h6, keeping very flexible, right? We have the g7 bishop still pointing down the diagonal, and the knight eyes this f5 square. And this is also a really effective weapon from the white side against a Dutch, playing knight to h3. So we're using this exact same idea that's effective for white, and we're playing it from the black side.
Yep. In these structures, you always need to be a little bit worried about this f5 break and kind of like throw your whole game, like a whole wrench in the game. Especially like imagine this knight's not here and the rook is backing it up. So yeah, this is a nice move just to reinforce that square a little more. So after knight h6, white is finally going to get their bishop to challenge us on the dark squares. And we're going to castle, and this is where the line ends. So from here, we have a plan of playing b6, get the rooks to the center here. Maybe this rook wants to be on e8. And we're going to try for the e5 break and just kind of chop away at white's most advanced pawn.
And another nice thing with knight on h6, if the knight's on f6, sometimes white will stick their knight on e5. So we're also preventing that knight e5 move as well, which I think that's a good way to remember. There's no knight e5 for white, and we are going to play e5 ourselves.
Yep, so the difference is that our bishop is there to pick up the pawn. If they go knight e5, we can take twice. If our knight is on f6, then our bishop has no influence on that square.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to 1b3, the nimzo-larsen attack. I actually kind of like this system for white. If black is unprepared, I think it can be effective. You can play e5 here, and that's a good system against the nimzo-larsen, but it's different than everything else we've looked at. So our recommendation is going to be stick with pawn to d5. After bishop to b2, you're going to like this, Jesse. We're going for the reverse London system, which is actually a very effective setup just in general. You know, if your opponent is just playing passive moves, the London setup is a very effective way to just get all of your pieces on good squares, get developed for 8 or 9 moves, and then develop a middle game plan after that.
Cool. Well, I'm a reformed London player, so hopefully this will seem a little familiar, maybe a little too familiar.
Too soon for you?
What's that?
Is it too soon for you?
No, not too soon. So after E3, we'll play E6 ourselves, and we're gonna kind of go for this type of setup. Knight F3, Knight F6, looking very London-y, love it. Anything to say about these moves?
Just one note, because this is such a big sideline, it's so rare, I didn't want a real sharp reply to the nimzo-larsen, so I'm just giving you something solid.
Yeah, makes sense. We appreciate it. People not studying, not liking a lot of theory. So bishop e2 and h6. So we're just going to make a little nook for our bishop and not allow this easy win of the bishop pair. White will castle. Bishop d6. Another very London-y move. It's looking so harmonious. C4 and c6, just solidifying the center. So this is... if you flip your board, it's going to look like a London.
Yeah.
Change the colors.
And now d4 for white. And pretty much white has to play d4 at some point. Otherwise, we will get e5 and eventually and build a big center. And the plan now is to play knight to e4, using that outpost square. Bring this other knight to d7, possibly to f6. We're going to castle. And I don't want you to have to memorize too much. So let's just look at kind of a sample line, go a few moves deeper and show what you can play. Knight e4, and after knight to c3, we bring this other knight into d7. And one thing that you'll find, some players like to trade just to make positions a little easier on them. And in this case, it also looks tempting because it doubles our e pawns. But what happens after d takes e, you kick this bishop off of f3, which is an important defender of the king side. And when that knight moves, you can play queen to g5, and look at these bishops and queen all pointing at the white king. How do you feel about this position?
This looks not like what I would expect from a London, I gotta say. So yeah, very nice position. Everything pointing to the king side, so this looks like a fun attack. I just want to push my h-pawn all the way down the board.
Yes, that's the plan. Push the h-pawn up the board. Maybe even knight f6, the knight can join the attack. Black's definitely having the fun in this position.
I'm looking here. Can we even sack the bishop? I mean, probably not, but it just looks so fun. Yeah, it's just completely winning for white, but we can sure try it.
Then you need the knight's help. That's the problem. Knight's out of play.
There's just not quite enough here.
Or you need the h-file open. That would help.
Yeah, that too. One or the other, but not neither.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at g3. This move, again, we have a lot of transpositions. This can transpose into knight f3 on move 1, c4 on move 1, or d4 on move 1. So, of course, we're going to play pawn to d5. We're recommending it whenever possible. And since those transpositions are in the air, let's look at bishop to g2 next. Definitely a sideline, just going for that real quick kingside fianchetto.
Yep, so I think c6 here is a very solid move. We're instead going to recommend e5 and just take the full center here. White's not fighting for the center of all, so we'll just take advantage of it. Lots of space, big center. So after d3, c5, just keep putting pawns in the middle. When in doubt, just put pawns in the middle.
You know what transposition I'm going for here, Jesse? This is a King's Indian defense in reverse, coming out of our classical 1d4 repertoire. So after knight f3, we have knight c6, castle, h6. We play the h3 kid from the white side, and I think this position is so good and so much fun that it's okay that we're down one move. because it's going to be kind of a solid locked up position, and we get all the same strategic ideas if you're already playing our classical 1d4 repertoire.
Yep, so after h6, knight bd2, just developing a piece. Bishop e6, so we do want to develop a piece and also share up this pawn a little bit too. After e4, we are actually going to push past with d4. So white kind of locked in their own bishop by pushing e4, I should say. And if we take, they could take with the knight, and it kind of opens up that bishop. So if we push past this light square bishop, kind of like what we saw in the English opening chapters, that it can get bad pretty quickly.
Yeah, and pretty much we always want to push. So when they play e4, we want to play d4, lock up that center. All right, so now let's look at a sample line with knight to c4. It's a really common idea, both in the King's Indian defense and in this line. Since we are down the one tempo, here we need to play queen to c7. So this is slightly different than what we play from the white side. That defends the e-pawn. Now a4 is a nice strategic idea for white, and the idea is it doesn't allow us to easily kick their knight with pawn to b5. But now I have this really nice idea for us, queenside castle, and now it's game on. We're going for the kingside attack.
Yeah, and I like this because it looks like our pawns are going to get there first. If white can't really push their b pawn. That square is really covered. If they push, we can maybe just lock it up with a6. And what's next for white? Like, how do you break through on the queen side?
And this is actually the line we show. We only go one
nice.
more move. But after a5, we recommend pawn to g5 right away. And if a6 is played here, we can always push past with b6 or even b5. We don't go this deep into the course, but a move like b5 is actually okay. Or b6 if you want to play more solid. But the cool thing here after g5, we have this nice plan, pawn to g4, and then this knight actually comes around to g6, which guards these dark squares, and then we throw this h-pawn up the board. And like Jesse said, it's a little bit harder for white to get their attack going because we have nice control of these dark squares.
Yep, I like this line a lot.
Yeah, so yeah, it's just like the King's Indian in reverse.